In this lecture, I'm going to introduce you to some very simple implementations of the for loop. And for loop is something that we use for iterating over items. And you can see, well, in the previous lecture, we had used the while loop to print out numbers, say, from 1 to 10 or 1 to 11. Now, I'm trying to do something very similar over here. I've used the keyword for, which essentially tells my Python interpreter that I want to start a for loop for I in range 10. Now I is an iterator and it is I that is going to iterate, and by range 10, range is an inbuilt Python functionality which prints out numbers in a given range. So when I say range 10, essentially it will print out numbers from 1 to 10. And now let us just do this. So numbers up to 9 have been printed out, but because when I specify range 10, essentially it just prints out numbers till 9, and we saw that in the previous lecture when we were working with the while loop. And the thing with range is that if I want to print out the first 10 numbers, then I specify 10, but if I want to print numbers, say, from between 3 to 8, then the first number I will give in is 3 and the second number will be 8, and let's just see how. Save. There. So now I will iterate over numbers 3, 4, 5, 6, and since I've specified 7 is going to be left out, so it will iterate over numbers in the given range 3, 4, 5, 6, and those will be printed out using the print function. Now, if I don't want to print out consecutive numbers, I can even specify steps. So the starting number, the ending number, and the steps. So instead of consecutive numbers, what has been printed out is 3, 5, 7. So it iterated over 3 to 9 using steps of 2. So instead of iterating consecutively, which is the default behavior, the for loop iterated my I over this given range of numbers in a step of 2, and that was printed out 3, 5, 7. And since with range we do not print out the last number, we stop at 7 because we are using a step of 2. Now, as you've observed before, the code I commented out, we can even use a for loop to iterate over a list of items. So let us just do that. So what happens is that I have declared a list containing the names of different fruits: apple, pear, grapes, melon, orange. I start my for loop using the keyword for. My iterator is f. It will iterate over the list called fruit, and when I say print f, it ends up printing out the names of all the items in the list fruit, which is the names of the fruits. And essentially this is how we use for to iterate over a collection of items. And in certain cases, for loop can even substitute the while loop. And what we have done so far is a very simple implementation of these different programming logics and loops. And in the next lectures and sections, we are actually going to build upon this basic knowledge to execute more detailed and complex tasks. So just make sure that you understand this portion. Okay, we are going to carry on working with our loops and basically some more programming logic. And one of the most important things that loops, especially for loop, can do for us is that it can iterate over data structures. So now I'm going to create a for loop to iterate over a dictionary. Dictionary creation is something that we covered in the previous section. And as you recall, the first entry over here is the key, and after the semicolon is the value. So my dictionary has been created. Now I wish to use a for loop to iterate over this dictionary, and let us see what happens when I use a basic for loop to iterate over this particular dictionary. So what it has done is that it has printed out Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, and if you look at the dictionary, you can see that these entries correspond to the keys. So when we iterate over a dictionary, by default, what is printed out are the keys. Now we don't have that problem with lists, because lists, they just store items as it is and the entire list will be printed out. But in this case, we have a bit of an issue that it is the key that is going to be printed out. Now what happens if I want to print out the values as well? For loop has the advantage of using two iterators to iterate over two different entities in a data structure. Therefore, I specify two iterators k.v instead of just an ordinary I. And let us see what happens then. Now, the first iterator is going to iterate over the first entity, which is the key, and the second iterator, v, is going to iterate over the second entity, value. And we will just see how that pans out in a minute. So now we get Japan, capital city, Tokyo. Capital city was the string that I put in. But the important thing to realize is that K iterated over the keys, the iterator K iterated over the keys, and iterator V iterated over the values. So with loops, we have the option of having more than one iterator to help us explore a given data structure like a dictionary in more detail. And items is an inbuilt Python function, and it is basically an object that provides a view on the items stored in the given data structure. In this case, it was the dictionary. We may also allude to the index. And now my iterator I, it iterated over the keys, which are Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea. But when I allude to dict I, it goes to that particular index in the dictionary and outputs the corresponding value to that given T. And that is how I get Tokyo, Beijing, Tapai, Seoul. And in addition to iterating over data structures, we can combine programming loops to actually help us perform simple arithmetic activities on a given data structure. And I will show you how. Now, printing out a given range of numbers is something we have encountered before, and we have used for loops for doing the same. But then why would I want to print out numbers from 1 to 20? It would be more useful if I could perform some kind of a mathematical operation. And for instance, say I want to print out all the even numbers from 1 to 20 or 1 to 2000. Now, this is where programming loops and combining programming loops really comes in very handy. And now I'm going to add an if statement inside my for loop to carry out this activity. This particular line, it just specifies if a number is divisible by 2 or not, and if modulus 2 is equal to 0. So finally, after working our way through so many different kinds of loops and their combinations, we come to nested for loops. These are complicated, and therefore let me just take you straight onto an example. See over here, we see something like cat, dog printed 3 times over, followed by cat, dog printed 3 times over, and so on. And this loop has been repeated repeatedly. And this is what nested for loops do for us. Over here, I have created nested for loops, outer loop, inner loop. And we can see that I've already declared for x in range 1 to 5, print cat. So, I want to print cat 4 times. But then I just don't end up printing cat 4 times. What happens is for y in range 1 to 4, print dog, which means I want to print my dog 3 times. And then I finally print over. So then what happens here? And I think seeing my choice of range, you can see that somehow my dog was nested into my cat. So now let us see how that happens. What nested for loops do is that they will run the outer loop once and print cat, and that's how you see cat. Then, instead of going on printing cat, the program will move and it will run the inner loop according to the range specified, and in this case, it will print dog 3 times. I specify range 1 is to 4, and that will only go up to 3, so it will print dog 3 times, and it's done that. Then the final line of the loop will be run, and that is over, and that is how over gets printed out. Over. Then what happens? Then the program goes back to the start of the outer loop, and the previous steps are run. And that's how we get our cat, dog 3 times over, and the loop is run 4 times because in the outer loop I specified my range to be 1 till 5, so that means it will run 4 times. And essentially this is how nested for loops work. And now we will start putting all of this knowledge together to build a very simple number guessing game.